Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches, and today we are going to be talking about alleged horror film Killjoy from 2000. And Killjoy begins by introducing us to Jada, her best friend Monique, and the socially outcast Michael. And Michael obviously has a thing for Jada, and she seems to have some sympathy for him, but she warns him off because, her boyfriend is jealous and he's going to beat Michael up if he sees Michael hanging around. He does see Michael hanging around, and he does beat him up. Michael, who is obviously a fairly smart kid, and whose best response to this would probably be to grow up, do well at school, and get a great job, and live a happy life, instead chooses to respond to this by attempting to summon a murderous demon named Killjoy, which, for me at least, kind of eliminated any sympathy that he might have won in the opening scene. The spell doesn't seem to work, however, and Michael's not going to live to regret that, basically. A year later, after he's dead, however, a murderous clown appears on the scene and begins a killing spree that resembles, sort of like a cut price, less funny Freddy Krueger. And soon, even Jada is in the firing line. Okay, so let's first things first. Killjoy is a terrible movie. The writing is terrible on every front. It has a terrible plot, it has terrible characterization, it has terrible dialogue. It's all terrible. The acting, well, it would be unfair to say that it's all terrible, but a significant chunk of it definitely is. And the effects, in particular anything to kind of like do with shooting, where they use CGI blood, are so laughably awful that they transcend terribleness. But all this terribleness doesn't mean that there's nothing interesting to talk about, because there is. First of all, you probably managed to follow my plot summary without getting confused. I mean, it is basically just a put-upon-nerd summons a demon clown and things go wrong. But you don't need to worry if all of those details were too much to take in, because Killjoy has you covered. About 40 minutes into its runtime, the film stops to have a character do a scene-by-scene recap of everything that's happened so far, with recycled footage from said scenes to illustrate his little "previously on Killjoy" monologue. Given that the complexity of the plot in no way requires this, I suspect the primary driving factor was a need to cheaply pad the runtime. Because even with this sort of extended recap of itself, Killjoy barely breaks 70 minutes in length. Though, trust me, it feels a lot longer when you're actually watching it. So yeah, don't recap yourself, movie. You weren't worth watching once, let alone one and a bit times, because you're recapping yourself. Secondly, who is it about? Killjoy seems confused about this on this point. Now, in most movies, you can tell who the main character is pretty early on, because it makes sense. Give the audience somebody to root for and cheer on. Not here. At first the movie seems like it's going to be about Michael, but then he goes all demon summoner and he gets killed. So it's not about him. Is it about Jada? She's pretty clearly our final girl, to put it in 1980s slasher terms. But unfortunately, as a protagonist, she lacks much of a character or any motivation beyond survive. And yeah, that was pretty much true of the one survivor in the original Friday the 13th as well. But when Friday the 13th came out, the idea of a movie where no one was safe was new and fresh. And arguably what made it compelling was not knowing which of these sort of half a dozen people might live. The lack of a clear protagonist was actually part of its strength. 20 years later, however, the final girl structure has been worn into the ground. We all know it. Scream has deconstructed it in detail. In fact, by 2000, we probably had Scream 2 as well. And in those circumstances, Jada's blandness is not a strength, it's a weakness. If anything, the movie seems to really, be about Killjoy himself. In much the same way that the first two Puppet Master movies are much more focused on the killer puppets than on the people who become their victims. The problem is, Killjoy is much less interesting and entertaining than the murderous marionettes from Puppet Master. Sorry, Killjoy, but there it is. Finally, we've probably all heard that annoying "I don't see colour, I just see the person" refrain, quite possibly from a clearly racist character on a TV show. And if nothing else, this movie, and really it did do nothing else, but if nothing else, this movie did make it clear to me that we do see colour, even if we prefer that we didn't. Like I'm a Black Lives Matter kind of guy. I'm well out on the left wing of politics, especially by American standards. But when I sat down and started watching Killjoy, and the first three characters shown were all African American, I thought to myself, there are no white people in this. And then I immediately felt mortified for thinking that, because, I've watched hundreds of movies where the first three characters were all white, and never in the first 2 minutes of those films have I thought to myself, everybody in this movie is white. So that was an eye-opening thing to experience. A bit of a wake-up call about how easy it is to be blind to how much of cinema is about people like me. And to realise that, seeing yourself, on screen might not seem like a big deal when all you see on screen is yourself. But given how noticeable it is when what you're seeing is not yourself, it gives you an idea. It does give you a little tiny bit of an insight into how it might be to experience actually seeing yourself when you don't. It's, I'm not, in any way comparing the experiences as being equivalent, but maybe it gives you a little bit more of an insight into how important representation is, which is, the point I'm trying to make here. So despite how awful this movie was, for that reason alone, I'm grateful that I saw it. I'm grateful because it did really underline that to me. Next time, get to the chopper, because we're going to be watching Predator and talking about Predator. And generally speaking, saying really nice things about Predator, because this is a good movie. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch you next time.